One of my favorite stories of the Bible involved Gideon and his army taking a sip of water by a nearby brook. I know it doesn't seem much of a page-turner, does it? The book of Judges recounts this event. At this point in their history, Israel is being led by Gideon as they try to claim possession of the promised land, an act which often brings about war from the surrounding nations. In this particular event, Gideon and his army are about to battle the Midianites. Now, the Midianites are a much larger nation, and so it stands to reason that they have much larger of an army. Even with 32,000 troops, Israel would be vastly outnumbered. As the day of battle draws near, God comes to Gideon and says, "You have too many men for me to deliver Midian into your hands. Announce to the people that anyone who trembles or fears may turn their backs and leave." Now, I've never been to war, I've never been to battle, but I imagine that an announcement like that would not inspire confidence in the troops, nor would the fact that 22,000 people begin to pack their things. 2/3 of the army begin to leave. And those 10,000 troops that did not tremble or fear, well, now they are. It's at this point that the story for Israel seems to go from bad to worse, because God comes to Gideon again and says, "You still have too many men. Take them down to the water for a drink, and I will sift them for you." One by one, the troops come to take a sip of water, and the Lord directs Gideon to divide them based on how they drink the water. Those who kneel down to take a sip of water are to stand on one side. Those who lap up water like a dog are to stand on the other. 9,700 people kneel down to take water. 300 lap up water like a dog. Now, which group do you think God directs Gideon to choose? That's right, the lappers. You know, it's difficult to understand why lapping up water like a dog would be so significant. But there's a couple things that we know. For one, the Israelites understood dogs to be wild, scavengous beasts. Scripturally, there is no positive reference to a dog anywhere in the Bible. Israel had no understanding of Lassie or Toto or that German shepherd from The Littlest Hobo. No, dogs were unlovable beasts to be avoided. And so the implication is that these 300 lappers would not be the cream of the fighting crop. Secondly, and probably more importantly, in choosing these 300 lappers, God effectively whittles Gideon's army down by 99%. Gideon's army is now only a speck of what it was just earlier that morning. And yet, as odd as it may seem, it is now that God comes to Gideon and says, "Go down to the camp of Midian, and I am going to give it into your hands." You know, God's activity in our lives may seem hard to understand. And frankly, there are times it might seem downright ridiculous. However, God's activity is always for the purpose of having us put our honest and authentic and heartfelt trust in His strength and His precision. God initially tells Gideon that his army is too strong because, quote, "You may boast against me, that your own strength has saved you." Well, with an army of only 1% strong, Gideon has no choice but to rely on God, and the army can do nothing but enter into battle, trusting and relying upon the God who leads them and who would fight for them. You know, could it be that when God does the unexplained, or the unconventional, or even the unabashedly weird in our lives, it's because He is trying to lead us into a space of trust and reliance? You see, what sometimes hinders our faith is not the unwillingness to enter into the places where God leads us, but the oft too prevalent attitude of self-reliance and self-mastery. While we may take the steps that God wants us to take, we do so in our own strength, in our own power. We see our life of faith as lived by our own understandings and our own might. But if that's the case, can we actually say that we are trusting in God? It's this that God says is boasting against me. You know, the fact is, God has given us amazing promises in regards to how we are to enter into our future. God has promised to empower us. God has promised to strengthen us to meet the challenges and temptations that we will inevitably face. But furthermore, God has promised us that His presence will reside with us deeply and intimately as we journey in those times. Being a people of faith, then, means that we recognize our apparent, our humble need for God, and we enter into those moments in the gritty need to rest upon His presence. Instead of turning to the 32,000 reasons why we can gain the victory ourselves, we are rather to cultivate an attitude of trust and reliance when we face our own Midianites. The call of faith is not in seeking our own victory, but in trusting that God will win the victory for us. It can be hard to try to muster whatever strength that we need to fight our battles. The attempt to bring about our own victories based on our own stratagems and strength can be exhausting, and it leaves us both anxious and tired. But what freedom! What freedom is found in allowing God to be the force of strength for us. What peace is uncovered in acknowledging our basic need for help, and what joy erupts in watching God move as God has promised. In the end, Gideon's army praises God for the victory that God secured over the Midianites. When we embrace our need, not just for God's guidance, but for His strong presence, then we will truly begin to live our lives in humble trust and reliance. And then, like Gideon and his army, our lives too will be transformed into places of ceaseless praise for the great and glorious things that God does for us.